Now, during our break, we were talking about a very controversial issue that really does need to be discussed, and that's abortion. Because it seems like everyone has a different perspective and view on what should and should not happen. Now, how many of you agree with abortion?
I agree with abortion.
I do.
I also.
I don't believe in
Now,
abortion.
you have children, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
I have 2.
And so, how old are your kids?
My daughter's 8, and my son will be 2 in August.
Now, for a lot of students, abortion is a form of birth control. They pop abortion pills like Skittles, every other day of the week, and it's no big deal to them. And so I guess they haven't valued life in that regard the way you do. What kept you from having an abortion and having your children?
Because I would always have that wonder in the back of my mind what that child's potential would have been. If I would have aborted the pregnancy, what kind of joy would that child have brought me and my family? I didn't want to allow that opportunity to pass me. So if it was in the will of God that I had a healthy child, then that's what I did. And I knew that I had other people behind me, supporting me, not necessarily the child's father at the time, but I did what I had to do to fulfill what I felt was important to me.
So you were selfless in your thinking. You weren't necessarily thinking, this is going to affect my education, this is going to affect my finances. You were thinking about the life of that child.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't about me at that point because, once you commit this act of sex,
that's one of the consequences that happens.
And
that's the responsibility that goes along with it.
You don't leave that out of the back of your mind. If you're taking on this act, then you have to.
Well, on college campuses, do you think that we separate the effects of sex from the actual act of it? So we can enjoy the pleasure, but as long as I don't get it pregnant, as long as I don't get an STD, I'm cool.
My stance on abortion, and I hope that in politics one day this isn't aired again, but
it will be.
Okay, but and I'm gonna stick to it now and then. My stance on abortion is this: if a college female or any female, for example, has been raped, or if she has an abortion within a time frame where the fetus isn't sentient yet, hasn't reached the stage of, I want to say an embryo. Am I saying the right words?
Okay.
I hope I'm saying the right words. But until it's reached that stage, then yes, abortion is good then. Because, the child isn't alive.
But now we're having a discussion about when is that actual child alive. Some say, it takes, 3 weeks versus, the time that the sperm hits the egg. I guess it's about your concept of when life begins. Okay, I'm glad you understood it then, because I really think that if a child isn't, if it's not alive yet, or if the woman has been raped, then therefore, if a woman in college has made a mistake, then therefore, abortion, by all means. Are you're speaking about rape, or are you speaking about a mistake?
I'm speaking about rape and also a mistake that has happened, and if she does it before 3 months, or if she does it whenever life exists.
To me, I think there's such a fine line between birth control, that man made and uses to have sex without the consequence of having a child, and abortion. To me, they're kind of the same thing.
So you equate the use of a condom or a diaphragm or pills to keep from getting pregnant the same as an abortion?
It's bordering such a fine line between what people, like she said, thinking about what that child needs and be kind of projecting down the road what could happen. Well, what could happen if I didn't take birth control or use a condom? What could happen if I didn't abort that child? To me, it's the same question.
Yeah. But
I was just saying, let's see, I agree with Cinnamon as why she didn't get an abortion. I am for it, I guess, in specific circumstances. It is not necessarily rape. I think mistakes, I think that's a horrible excuse to use an abortion. That's just like, I'm going to just erase it because I messed up. I think that's like a horrible excuse. I don't agree with abortion in that sense, and I don't agree with abortion as far as it being another form of birth control. I think that it is something that should be used in a case-by-case situation. If perhaps you were raped and don't want to continue with the pregnancy, then I can't blame you for that. Even abusive relationship. I had a friend who was in a horrible relationship, and she got pregnant, and she wanted to have it, and we were talking about it. I'm like, well, you know, and as it turns out, his whole goal was to get her pregnant so she wouldn't leave, because it happened again, and eventually she.
So once again, we're going back to the sex issue and how people use sex and some of the consequences of it. I know people who cheat, and they wound up pregnant by the person that they were cheating with. Mistake. So do we terminate the potential life of that child because it was a mistake?
I really believe wholeheartedly that maybe it's necessary because, for example, you have a 16-year-old girl who's made a mistake. She is from a family that is messed up. Hypothetically speaking, she can't take care of that child, and her family cannot take care of that child. Therefore, that child becomes a burden upon the mother, upon the grandmother,
why
and
not
upon
adoption?
the aunt.
Why not adoption?
But why put a child, a life through that though?
Through what?
Were you speaking of a mistake or rape?
A mistake this time. I said a 16-year-old girl who made a mistake, and she comes from an unfortunate family, and it's a burden on that child, and it's a burden on the rest of the family. It's an added on burden.
But the medical
why put a child through that?
Will push you to have an abortion. That was kind of my experience. Like, well, if you're not with the father, then you should have an abortion. Well, no, because that's not going to solve the problem. I mean, I guess for somebody that wasn't responsible, like you say, or it might have been an easy way out, but I'm not going to take that way. I guess for me, I would rather deal with the consequences of my actions than have somebody else deal with it. I mean, it's that simple.
To me, like they're both sides of the issue are matters of the heart. Like it's up to that individual. Like say I want to be selfish and not have a child, or I can want to be selfless and have the child.
Well, let me throw,
even if it isn't
let
planned.
me throw another argument into the fold here. Do you think that abortion is a woman's right? Do you think it's her right to choose exclusively?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So the male should have no say or any type of influence on what takes place with that child.
Absolutely. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I've always thought about that.
I don't even understand that concept, because if sex is done between a man and a woman and a seed is conceived as a result of that, I can't have any say about what this woman chooses to do with my seed.
But then how many men are actually in their children's life? Like normally when this big topic of abortion comes into play, it's usually with the age group where a man gets a woman pregnant and then leave. Well, not necessarily the age group, but like everyone I know, they had a kid and now they're by themselves. So why should a man be able to say what you can and can't do? Because you're not taking care of a kid that he's here. So what? I should get rid of it so you can have clear conscience?
Hold on. Well, that's not. When you look at it statistically, because I spend a lot of time on this topic of abortion. Do you know who has abortions the most? What category of women have abortions the most? Married women. It's not the single. It's not the child. It's a married woman, because she's thinking about all of the, as you say, the burden of having another child and the financial obligation and starting all over again. And so many people are doing it for many different reasons. We're all using selfish, in my opinion, reasons about why we do what we do. And when you look at propaganda, many people use the rape card. Okay, well, what if she gets raped? Do you realize that less than 1% of all cases of people who have abortions is a result of rape? So once again, we're dealing with a moral issue. And my thing is, if you're going to engage in sex, you should be forced to deal with what comes along with that.
Can I go back to the question that you just asked about the man having a certain say? Shouldn't the man, okay, for example, if the woman is sane, and if she's come to a logical conclusion, like, you know, me and my husband, we're not ready right now. I feel as though it's because I'm going to carry this child. I feel as though that before we have a child, I have either the option of terminating the pregnancy or continuing with the pregnancy. You know, now if she's insane or whatever, maybe the man does have a say. You know, maybe he still wants that child. I mean, but this question is really a question on ethics, though.
It is, because at the end of the day, and you know, we have to wrap this thing up, I think that we have separated morality and responsibility with the act of sex. And as long as we can divide it, segment it, subtract it from the reality of what takes place, we'll always have issues. But if we can merge them together and realize that if we're going to engage in this practice, we have to deal with all of the consequences, good, bad, or indifferent, I think that our perception would be different and our behavior would be different. If there was no such thing as a birth control pill, If there was no such thing as a needle that could get rid of an STD, I think our perceptions and behaviors would be totally different. But it's too easy to overcome every issue that creeps up in our lives to make sex so convenient. And that's the thing we want to consider. That's the thing that we should talk about. So we hope that as you watch this program today, we sparked some thought in your mind about some of the good sides and the bad sides of relationships, some of the expectations, some of the consequences, so that you can make healthy decisions from this point on. Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Relationship Sexpert Show. Go to our website at therelationshipsexpert.com for more information about our guests and about our topics. See you next week.